Hello, everyone. I am Ethan Banks. You may know me as the co-host of the Packet Pushers podcast and on other shows on the Packet Pushers podcast network, which if you have not heard of that, you can find out more at packetpushers.net. In this webinar today with LiveAction, we are going to discuss future-proofing your SD-WAN investment. We're going to be digging into how you truly monitor an SD-WAN environment and what you need to get done to truly keep up with what's happening in that sort of an environment. Now, the person who's going to be doing most of the talking today is John Smith, CTO at LiveAction. And if you have questions along the way, if you would, use your GoToWebinar interface to ask questions. I'm going to be monitoring those questions as we go along and as I can. And when it's appropriate, I will percolate those questions up to John, and we're going to answer them in real time. We also hope to have a time for questions at the end for folks that want to go a little more in depth. The format of this is very simple. We're going to go through some slides here to kind of set the stage for what we're going to see in the demo. So we've got about 20 minutes or so of slides, and then the rest of the time devoted to a demo of the LiveAction product. And with that, I turn it over to John.
Thank you so much, Ethan, and thanks everybody for joining. So just a quick intro of LiveAction. So we enable the digital transformation with SD-WAN, and we help with visibility of the infrastructure, application experience, service assurance, and proactive insights. And we'll go into more in depth on each of these topics, and we'll actually give you a demo like Ethan mentioned. So right off the bat, just setting the stage for SD-WAN. So on the right-hand side, kind of a canonical representation of what an SD-WAN might look like. So you have data centers, public clouds, sites, campus with people accessing apps in different areas, also SaaS, multiple service provider or transport. And really you have edges that are being formed from all the different locations, providing capabilities to use different transports. So there's various reasons why customers are migrating to SD-WAN, as Ethan and others know, but operational expense, agility, application performance. So it runs the gamut, right? The branch connectivity as well. And we see multiple connections at the branch. DIA become very important as cloud and SaaS adoption. And multi-transport is also having provide cost reductions is becoming critical as well. And what we see with customers are as they plan and deploy, they look at all these different factors in determining which SD-WAN technology to choose. And there's a variety of deployment approaches, and I think in the last Gartner report, there's like 40 vendors in this space. So you can imagine there's a lot of different variations, but typically it's either a physical virtual appliance, CPE, there's a controller that may be in SaaS, they might not be, and different deployments where it might be on-prem or SaaS or managed service. And some customers are doing brownfield, some are doing greenfield. So those kind of play into the different choices of what technology that they would use. The other aspects is really functionality and scalability, the complexity of the actual technologies, what kind of legacy infrastructure. So some of these are, existing CPEs can add functionality to provide SD-WAN. If that's the case, it might be a simpler deployment or option. And also the last aspect, the human aspect of it, is the staffing. If the staff is familiar with a certain technology, they might actually, choose that technologies as well.
So, John, just back up a second, just for one point of clarification for those folks that are new to SD-WAN. So that in the middle there, you've got service provider 1, service provider 2, and internet in the diagram, and then these yellow lines over the top. The point being, all of those service providers or the internet can be used as one great big pool of bandwidth that you're effectively running a tunnel across the top of, but it all happens automatically, where the SD-WAN software takes care of all of that for you and all of that connectivity, right?
Right, and typically it's based off of like application performance, and it's going to choose the best path. So now you can leverage multiple transport, not necessarily the most expensive one, to do like lower priority traffic, for example.
Got it. Okay, so now we get what it is, and yes, as soon as you start thinking about what's really happening, the complexity that's involved there. Sorry. Okay.
Perfect. And then, we've done a bunch of SD-WAN deployment with our customers, and we see this pattern over and over where they want to do a day 0, day 1, and day 2, and I'll kind of describe this in a little bit more detail. So typically what happens is before they actually deploy SD-WAN, they want to do a planning or assessment where they want to baseline and understand, what are the current applications, what are the users using, which sites are they going to, what kind of applications, and also like the service providers and some of the SLAs that they can, decipher from what they're getting. So after they do the day zero, they typically choose a site or multiple sites to do the initial deployment of SD-WAN. And at that point, it becomes really important to understand the service assurance, like is the policy actually doing what you intended? Because as you're building out these policies for SD-WAN, you're definitely saying, this particular business application has certain priorities, and then it's going to take certain transport at certain times. So you want to have the ability to assure and verify those policies. So it's like, when the very first time you use a self-driving car, it's like you're a little bit nervous. You want to make sure that it's actually working properly. So that's kind of what you need in day one, is just getting that assurance. And then the last step is, once you have it operational, how do you monitor this day-to-day, the alerting? And then at some point, you're going to have to see if the policy needs to be optimized. You want to plan. You also need to do capacity planning to understand if you want to increase bandwidth for certain service provider, and are you getting the SLAs from certain service provider? Because with SD-WAN, you get a lot more metric and visibility into that as well. And the last piece is, troubleshooting through visibility analysis and control. So that's kind of the pattern we see.
So kind of the challenge there, all these different circuits from all these different providers potentially becoming a part of your WAN with the SD-WAN overlaid on top of it. Now you're kind of a layer up from the actual physical circuits and managing them. Whereas before, if you had one provider, it's kind of easy to point the finger and say, hey, you're out of scope. Now it gets a little more troublesome to pinpoint all of the issues.
Yeah, and we'll go through it in the demo, but it's not always I'm going through the MPLS. It's usually like it was over the MPLS, then it had problems, and it switched over to the internet. Why did that happen? What was the logic? Did it follow my policy? So helping to understand that becomes really important. And then these are the three challenges that we see from a monitoring of SD-WAN perspective. And the first one that I think we've been talking about this already is the visibility and assurance. And there's a human aspect to this, the human in the loop, where there's an operator that has to set the policy and the intent. And you have to be able to see if it's actually working to what you intended for that to do. And I go back to that self-driving example where the human being has to be involved at some point, because these systems will have failures, or they'll not be able to adjust for every use case. And then at that point, the operator may need to have to understand and then step in. And one of the issues with automated system is the operator become detached from the system since they don't have to run it day to day like they do the current WAN. So they might not understand all the intricacies of it, but when they have to troubleshoot, they need a visualization and assurance capability to be able to map that so they can quickly troubleshoot and understand the problem. So that's one aspect of it. The second one is really about coverage and integration. So multi-vendor breadth of coverage. So yeah, we had the vEdge or edge devices in the system, but typically you want to be able to see beyond that. And I have a slide following this that kind of shows that in more detail. And we had one deployment where the visibility and coverage was better in the outside of the SD-WAN than on the inside of the SD-WAN, and they tended to blame the portion of the network that was least visible, although it may not have been the problem. So getting the coverage just beyond the vEdge or edges is actually pretty important. And integration becomes really key as well, because you have this automated system that are making decisions, and it's really a controller, but it has a lot of telemetry and data. So gathering that information becomes pretty important. So usually there's SNMP and NetFlow that you can gather, but more and more it's usually REST API, and you can get information about policy/intent. And also, model-driven telemetry or Google Protocol Buffer, we've seen that as well. We see message buses. So there's a lot more interesting data being produced from the controller. So being able to integrate to those becomes very important. And part of that is understanding topologies and inventory as well. And the last piece of this is really the analytics platform. So it's difficult enough to build an SD-WAN system. Building an analytics platform that can scale and provide all the capability is another bigger challenge. And typically you tend to see that built by a separate company because you can do, there's so much depth into doing analytics at that kind of scale. So when you look at it, it's really, having a big data backend, can you scale easily, provide real-time, but historical and granular data so that you can analyze and debug information that could have happened like a week ago, for example. And then the diversity of data sets. So when we look at all the different types of SD-WAN controllers, the types of data is not necessarily uniform. There's no standard in terms of like the REST APIs and the results. So being able to deal with those diversity as we collect all that information, because some data might come through REST API, some might come from NetFlow. So you have to be able to absorb that and then do the correlation and normalization as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, right, the new data sources that you're talking about, being able to pull the telemetry from the controller or from network devices that are in the system is fairly new. And there can be a very steady stream of data coming off of those devices. So being able to listen, pull that data that's coming in, and then do something with it is a different challenge on a different scale than, say, SNMP polling that happens every few minutes, or sampled net flow, these kind of things, which is a much more finite set of data. And then as you said, I just wanted to ask you about this, John. You mentioned analytics platforms. Well, a lot of the SD-WAN providers that are out there do have their own reporting engine and so on that comes with it. So you kind of get a pretty dashboard and a pretty screen that shows you what's going on with the SD-WAN system you bought from them. But you're saying this is going beyond what you'd get canned from the vendor and going deeper and really mining the data and giving you more insights and analytics than what you're going to get out of the box?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really also about coverage and all the different types of devices that interface into SD-WAN as well. But doing an analytics platform at scale with the granularity of data is a pretty challenging capability to produce. So yeah, we see, I mean, the reason why we partner with a lot of these SD-WAN vendors is because I think they understand the challenge and the complexity of doing this, and doing it with a simple deployment model becomes very key. So, and just talking more about the analytics piece, the other thing that we kind of see is the complexity and the scale of the analytics is such that applying machine learning becomes important. So it's like really helping to automate the analytics process, because yeah, it's not too bad if you have a couple of sites, but when you start talking thousands of sites and you have an overlay fabric on top of an underlay, and then you have all this telemetry data, you have to start applying machine learning, not to replace the operator, but to help augment the operator and help them understand the context.
Okay, so I got to qualify machine learning then, because a lot of folks are starting to throw, oh yeah, we got machine learning and we're doing that. And what they really mean is we're doing statistical analysis with thresholding and this kind of thing, as opposed to what I think of as true machine learning, which is an algorithm that learns from a data set and then makes inferences about that data, and it's built as truly a machine learning a function that gains insights via a heavy knowledge set and then goes from there and builds. Is that, which are you talking about actually here?
Yeah, it's true machine learning, where the more data you give it, the more it understands and gets better at modeling all the different anomalies that we're looking for. But we also have this interesting concept of human in the loop, where the human operator can actually tell us, these are important, these are not, to reduce some of the noise and help the actual models get better at telling us issues before they actually happen. And I have a slide deck that kind of goes more in detail, and then we'll show it on the demo as well. So I think that'll probably help clarify.
The human in the loop, as in informing the machine learning algorithm what's important and not important in a given environment.
Yeah, so having that loop back to tell the machine learning that how to better model what they're learning is actually pretty important. Otherwise, it's going to try, but really the operator knows what's important and what's not, and having that feedback loop is actually pretty important. And the last piece of the analytics platform is really the visualization. So we have unique capabilities for exploring and explaining the networks and an end-to-end view. And I think that'll become more obvious when we actually go through the demo. So on the next slide, this is a little bit more detailed showing a typical SD-WAN deployment. And you can see like the coverage of the actual edge devices. So this is a little bit more Cisco-centric. We have the edges that are being shown here, but you absolutely need a management tool from the SD-WAN vendor to bring this up, make sure it's operational, and they have coverage into their edges and the edge devices. So that's absolutely critical. But what we see from our customers is what they really need is ability to see end-to-end of what's connecting to the SD-WAN and being able to troubleshoot across this particular network as well. And the data that we get from outside of the SD-WAN helps complement and helps troubleshoot and understand the network. And there's a lot of complexity in terms of the branch being able to communicate over multiple transport, but we see more and more customers connecting to Amazon and Azure. And there, you're switching to another virtual network with another controller that's built into Amazon. And we see more and more customers creating complex networks there as well. So what we see is systems of systems, and trying to understand that becomes very complicated. And in the futures is going to be more software-defined access in the campus side. So as you get more and more systems, having an analytics platform that can make sense of this becomes much more critical.
So, John, a question's come in here that I think it's pretty important to ask. The question is whether or not we're familiar with Cisco's SD-WAN solutions, IWAN, and so on. And then can you explain why LiveAction's product is a better SD-WAN solution, which I think demonstrates not quite understanding exactly how LiveAction fits in. So maybe that's a good chance to explain that.
Yeah, so LiveAction is an analytics platform that actually helps monitor and provide that day 0, day 1, day 2 workflow. So we work with the SD-WAN technology and various companies. So we're complementary, and Cisco has various offerings, but they had the recent acquisition of Viptela. So Cisco SD-WAN, which is the brand name for Viptela, is one SD-WAN technology that they have. They also had a pre-existing one called IWAN. So we work with both of those technologies, and we talk to the controllers, and we get information, and we provide rich visualization and analytics. And I think it'll become a little bit more obvious when I show the demo, because I'll actually show those two use cases, the IWAN and the Viptela case.
John, one thing I wanted to call out on this slide is just to stress to people that are used to a WAN and thinking of their WAN environment as, well, there are these branch offices in my data centers and my campuses that I own, and that's my WAN. And then, oh yeah, sometimes we go out to the internet because we've got infrastructure as a service offerings, we got the SaaS services that we use. And in the modern WAN, you really are able to optimize services up to your IaaS and up to your SaaS and different websites with an SD-WAN deployment as well, because there's tight integrations with those remote sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are finding the performance for applications are better if the branch could directly go to like the SaaS website without backhauling traffic back to the data center. So it's giving them a lot more option, which improves user experience for sure. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. So talking a little bit about the machine learning that we talked previously. So on the left-hand side, you'll see some of the different types of algorithms and models that we build. And it's really augmenting the expert, the operator, and helping to automate the routine tasks that they have to do day in and day out. And as you scale and you have all these complexities, you really have to automate this analytics process. So our goal is to provide meaningful performance information and anomaly detection more from an application performance perspective. So we're not a network security company per se, but we'll look at application performance. Is it deviating from the performance that you normally would expect at this point, hour, and day and week type scenario? It might be caused by a security event, but really there are users getting affected by this. And our goal is to really prevent user experience problems with their applications before they occur, so we can tell that this is trending and we haven't seen this pattern before, and it's something that you should look at. But we provide the capability to actually tell us, this is actually not important. I was expecting that. With that, we can actually fine-tune our model so that it's less noisy, for example. So we absolutely see the human in the loop as being critical to this whole process here.
So John, one more question that's come in since we're transitioning slides. Cisco DNA controller, Cisco did the recent DNA announcement and so on. Does LiveAction fit in with the DNA controller in some way?
Yes, so we are part of the ecosystem for DNA controller partners, and we have API integrations to that as well. So we see that as a transition. We did APIC EM, DNA Center Next, and so yeah, it's really grabbing those data sets similar to what the controller did in the past to provide all that telemetry to understand. And eventually, this is going to cover WAN and also access, right? Campus fabric. So it's really this bigger plan for us to like do the integrations to provide telemetry into the entire fabric.
Okay, which leads right into the next question then. I mean, is it today WAN, and then tomorrow the LAN and the data center and maybe hypervisors and so on, where at some point I'd be able to use LiveAction for analytics to cover my entire IT infrastructure?
Yeah, so that's definitely our goal, and actually looking at the map of the network, we do quite a bit in all the different areas today as well. So if you look at public cloud like AWS, using the CSR, we can actually visualize entire virtual networks in your Amazon cloud. And we can see that connecting to the SD-WAN. We can show you that in the campus, as campus has software-defined access coming on board with their fabric, having that connection. We already have a lot of the telemetry into that fabric as well. So.
And then yet one more, how are you compared to Cisco App Dynamics?
So App Dynamics is more from an application stack perspective, and we're more from like a network perspective. So if you look at it from like a market category, we're in the NPMD, which is network performance monitoring and diagnostic space. So we're really focused on like the network aspect of it. And we talk directly to the network devices, the controllers, and the fabric to help understand the network. Then to me, the network itself is complex enough, and I think you need an analytics platform focused on that particular area. Whereas App Dynamics is more from like the application stack, kind of along the lines of New Relic and other companies in that space. All
right, John, how many more slides before we get to the demo? I'm like rubbing my hands. I want to see this.
Yeah, I know. I want to get to the demo too. So. So I think we got through this slide. So this is my intro slide to the demo. So what I'm going to be showing you is SD-WAN architectures using the Cisco IWAN and the Cisco SD-WAN branded Viptela. So when you look at the right-hand side, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically you're going to have branches, campus, data center, using a controller, getting REST API, IPFix, SNMP data from the edge devices. So that's kind of the bigger picture of what I'm going to be showing you in the demo. So let me switch over to the demo.
While you're doing that, the Viptela controller, and we've mentioned integration with Cisco and being able to monitor IWAN stuff, and now Cisco SD-WAN as in Viptela stuff. So can you monitor then anything in a Viptela world? For example, the Viptela controller itself, the controller connection status, things like BFD status, bidirectional forwarding detection, orchestration connections, control connections, in other words, what the controller is able to talk to out there in Viptela land.
Right. Yeah, so I'll actually show you a visualization talking directly to all those different components, and I'll talk more in depth. But yeah, they'll come towards the end of the demo. But yeah, you'll see the comparison between IWAN and Viptela, so you'll be able to judge for yourself that it's pretty equivalent. Okay, so let me just go through a couple of these demos. So this is actually, our dashboard view. People have probably seen similar ones as well, but this provides like a high-level view of what's happening within the network. You can get specific information on WAN and also SD-WAN performance, and you can convert this to a NOC view if you wanted to. But really, this is really good for day zero planning to understand all the different sites. So even before you deploy SD-WAN, deploying a solution, you can get understanding of where are all the different sites, what are the different statuses, how much bandwidth, what kind of application. And we can give you, pretty good detail in terms of, where are these applications coming from, going to, and all the very basic information. So even before you deploy SD-WAN, getting an understanding of your environment, choosing your proof of concept sites, understanding where you're going to do your initial deployments becomes actually very important.
How did all this information get populated in here? Was there a discovery process?
Yeah, so we can do a couple of things. So we can do discovery, we can import addresses of devices from your other platforms. If you have SD-Wan already, we have integrations to populate from inventory REST APIs into those controller systems. So make it as seamless as possible to help you do that. And for the Cisco infrastructure side, we can help you configure the flow and other telemetry directly on the devices, so you don't have to crack open a Cisco manual to do that portion. So once you get that view, you can start understanding what's happening. And then just because you have SD-WAN, some of the workflows that you still need are things like WAN interface capacity planning. So this is kind of useful even before deployment to understand all the different sites, the key interfaces, and what's happening. So this is a typical 95th percentile report that you can do. Look at what's coming in and out, which one's being used the most. And we have the usual workflow to give you all the different graphs, right? So the interface bandwidth. So we combine information from SNMP and NetFlow. So if you have QoS applied, we can show you all the different errors and drops that are happening. Utilization, the flow information also tied together as well. So QoS drops, application flows. So
okay, so on the QoS stuff, you're actually talking about traffic that's hitting particular queues and then being dequeued in a specific way, and you can see by different traffic classes what's going on.
Yeah, pretty much. So we spent 10 years working with CBQoS MIBs on the Cisco devices. So we know all the ins and outs. You could do hierarchical QoS policies, 13 class models, everything. So we could give you pretty good detail before, even if you deploy, SD-WAN, and also post SD-WAN deployment as well. So I'm going to switch over to a little bit more interesting demo. So this actually shows you from a WAN perspective, whether you have SD-WAN deployed or not, all your different sites, who's consuming traffic from which site to another. So this is an interactive chord diagram. So you could look at specific site like San Jose, it's outputting the most of its traffic back to Azure, for example. And you can look at it from a diagram perspective or a tabular perspective, and you can look at inbound or outbound. So it's kind of good to see an overall picture of your WAN. And then once you deploy SD-WAN, this still works. So you can still understand who's consuming what traffic, which transport is it using, for example. And one of the key things is, if you're interested in a specific span, like Tokyo to Sydney, you can actually drill down and get more specific information. So what we did was we kind of realized that we had so much telemetry data that we needed to visualize it in a way that's easier for people to understand by abstracting it to like a pipe. So this basically breaks out that pipe from Sydney to Tokyo, and then we can show you in terms of applications, which DSCP markings, and then which service provider it took, and the status. And the status can come from, telemetry information from the edge devices. It could come from the controller themselves telling us that there's jitter, latency, packet loss issues, for example. Or it could be, straight application performance information. So we correlate information from various sources to give you this critical or normal. So it's pretty exploratory. It's kind of fun, actually. So you can look at different applications. For example, RTP audio. It's actually getting marked as best effort and also as EF, which is a little bit interesting, but it's taking all various paths like internet, MPLS, and some are normal and some are critical. So it gives you a visibility of what's happening over time as well, right? At the very bottom, you can actually see the time bar.
So, okay, one question on this display. Now, we've talked a lot about Cisco. Is this multi-vendor also, or are you really, partnered or aligned mostly with the Cisco solutions?
Now, this is multi-vendor. A lot of this is driven by flow, NetFlow, IPFix directly from the edge devices. So even if you're not running SD-WAN, you can get this visualization as well. So it's actually very useful. And one of the things that you want to see, for example, is a specific application. So I'm going to drill down into the voice over IP. So here it's telling me that it took 2 transport and it's critical and normal. So something weird is going on, but you really have to look at it from a time dimension. So I'm going to play this, and I hope this works on the GoToMeeting here. But
yeah, it's flowing through on mine pretty good. Yeah.
Okay. So what it's basically doing is, it took one transport and had issues. It flipped over to another, and then, as that had issues, it flipped back over. I gotta say that,
Okay.
we're
So
running a. No, go ahead.
sorry, John, but this is showing us over time which paths were selected to carry this voice traffic, and you're kind of getting this flow interaction demonstrating, okay, so for this time chunk, it's going mostly through internet and then partly through MPLS.
Right. Absolutely. And it's really, this is actual SD-WAN controller doing these decisions, and we're visualizing what it's doing actually over time. So if a customer, gets a complaint from their users at a particular time, something went wrong, you can actually go back at that point and see, oh yeah, the MPLS went bad and it was switched over to the internet, and it, flipped back over. So it's actually pretty useful to like correlate all this data and then abstract it to something that's useful that people can use to debug actually.
Mm.
And then
just an audience question here. Now, all of this that we're looking at, again, going back to something we talked about earlier, pairing LiveAction with, Cisco and say the Viptela solution. Viptela's got some analytics and reporting there. You're saying LiveAction is supplying even more information than what I would get out of the box from the Viptela solution?
Yes, absolutely. So a good example is like the net flow. We can collect and store that flow for long periods of time in granular format. So to do this actual visualization, you really need that raw data, right? Because you can see that it's the time granularity is pretty high here.
Yeah.
Okay. So to do that, we can go back like a month and be able to play this back exactly. And this is kind of useful because sometimes you have this reoccurring pattern that happens like every 2 weeks. This weird thing happens, and we have all the raw data to help you troubleshoot that.
Got it.
So I got to tell you that this demo system is rigged so that it causes this flip over all the time, and I'm going to show you that. So if you click on the service provider, you can actually drill down into this. So this is actually showing you on the internet side the flipping over of all the traffic. So yeah, it makes for a good demo. Not a realistic scenario here, but you can see all the application flow. It stops on the internet and then starts again, stops again. So you can look at this from like an application perspective, DSCP, address pair, and then you can see the equivalent side on the MPLS. So when it flips over from the internet side, it gets brought back over on the MPLS side here. So, I mean, this level of granularity you only get from like flow and SNMP and correlating that with the topology and building into a Sankey. So this is kind of the value add that we provide.
How deep will you let us drill in? So, I mean, we've got the graphical displays, being that if I want to see like raw stats, can I dig in that deeply?
Oh yeah, you can. And when I do the more in-depth demo using the application side, you'll see a lot more detail as well. So it's very interesting data set, by the way. So.
You mentioned a month worth of data historically. Is that how much you keep? Can you keep a longer data set than that?
Yeah, so our big data backend was optimized for flow and capturing data at scale. So depending, as long as you provision enough storage space, and we do it in a very compact format because it's built specifically for flow. Flow is like one of the biggest consumers of data, by the way. So if you wanted to do a year, and we have customers that have done years and a couple of years as well, as long as you size it, and it's pretty reasonable because it's not like an SQL database where it kind of grows out of proportion, but we have a very specific time series database for making sure it's compact but yet performant as well.
All right.
And last thing I want to show you on this one is like we can actually grab information from the controller. So this is actually showing you like packet loss, and this is what's causing those flipovers to happen. So you can see that it actually aligns with this point where the loss happens, and then the actual traffic flips over. So we get pretty good metrics in terms of loss, but we also get data about service provider performance. So on the MPLS side, we can give you like jitter, packet loss. Rate information as well as delay. So these are the factors that the controller are using to make those switchovers as well. So sometimes when you need to debug, you do need this granular level of detail to understand, is it really doing what I'm expecting?
That is an atrocious jitter average on that MPLS provider.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just noticed that. Okay, some more questions then about this that have come in. Real-time data. So is there a view where rather than looking at historical up till now, I can just sit there and it just kind of populates the current status for me?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when I do the second portion of the demo, you'll see real-time data, and it's actually pretty interesting as well. So I'll do that.
Cool. And then another question is there an ability to test this out for free? Some kind of a free demo, throw it in a VM, that kind of a thing?
Absolutely. The last slide in our deck has the URL to the download, but it's really liveaction.com/download. It's a full-featured capability. It's a virtual appliance. Very easy to spin up.
Okay.
It's good. We're getting rid of some of the questions that typically come at the end, so it's good.
For those of you that have asked the QoS questions, there's a couple of them that have come in. We're going to save those for the end, just to make sure we get through the SD-WAN and that monitoring first.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So next part I'll show is the machine learning piece of this. So this is our LiveAction LiveNX Insight. So it's continuously monitoring the traffic. So this is showing you like application anomalies for voice traffic, and it'll actually highlight portions where it's out of bounds. So you could tell us that this is actually not important, meaning that you should actually loosen the bounds a little bit more. It's too noisy. So if you push that, we'll push that back into our model to improve that, and over time it gets better and better.
So the bounds are the dashed lines?
Yeah. So yeah, the dashed lines are the bounds that we learn over time, and this will adjust right as we get more and more data. But it's really about time of day, day of week, and any interesting patterns on a particular day, for example.
Okay. So that orange trend line for today, if it goes outside of what has been determined to be normal bounds, the dashed lines, then I get that red anomaly. Hey, something's out of bounds here. You maybe need to check into. And so you're pointing out on this screen what has been detected as anomalous is, to me, not important. These are actually okay. And now the bounds are going to change over time?
Yeah, so it'll loosen the bounds if it's not important, but if you tell us this is important, then we'll start, really analyzing that particular application for that particular site in more detail, for example. So it's telling us, to learn that these things are more important, take that into account into your modeling.
And is this sitting on some box in my data center doing this learning, or is this machine learning happening up in the cloud somewhere?
Yeah, so this is happening in our public cloud infrastructure. And it's using particular machine learning algorithm and neural networks, deep learning capabilities. So the good thing about that is we can change algorithms and models very quickly to improve our capabilities. So the delivery model is I think helps in providing more insights and more capabilities. Right now we have the 3 types of insights: applications and daily summaries and paths, but for us to turn on 5 more insights, it's really just adjusting our cloud backend. So a couple more. So we have metrics that we gather. So we provide you like a daily summary of a particular egress point, for example. But the other thing that we're doing is path change. So whether you're running SD-WAN or not, we can actually look at a particular site and understand that you're having certain changes in pattern in terms of particular classes of traffic, and we can actually alert you on that. And typically we see this where if the path changes, whether it's from routing or SD-WAN, there's some issue that's causing that, and just helps you to alert that you might check into this, and you can tell us if it's important.
Okay, so as far as path goes, there would be an underlay and an overlay. The underlay is going to be the physical path, the overlay is going to be the SD-WAN tunnel that's on top. Do you model those separately? I mean, can I see those as separate things, or how do you show that in the interface?
Yeah, in the future, I think we could do both, but typically right now we do the overlay first. So more on the tunnel and more on the fabric side of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But we have the telemetry for both sides, so we could do the underlay as well. But I think
I mean, I could still drill in to and then know that it's this particular physical circuit underlay that's causing me the issue, even if we're not seeing graph data.
Oh yeah, so you can click on more and it'll actually take you to that particular site, and we can show you all the good details about flow, DSCP markings, applications, the usual stuff. So if you want to explore what's causing that, make it easy. We'll show you a very simple topology view as well.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Last piece I'll show you is the various integrations. So APIC-AM, ServiceNow, ICE, SD-WAN. So it's very important for us to talk to the controllers to get a lot of this information. So we keep adding more and more. And then I'm going to switch over to the more in-depth application here. So let me just switch over to that real quick. So this is our application for deeper troubleshooting and understanding. So this is a typical WAN deployment with multiple sites going to like a data center, for example. And you can overlay NetFlow from this. You can run IPFix, NetFlow v5, v9. And this is using deep packet inspection information, and we can categorize the different applications. So the left-hand side kind of shows you the different colors of applications. But we can do this in various formats. So if you wanted to see it from a DSCP perspective, we can, performance and others. And I'll go into performance a little bit more. But really, we have 4 patterns in this visualization area. And you can see that, when I unmerge this, we're talking, millions of flows per minute, billions per day. So unless you can, figure out how to like draw this in a way that's understandable, it's very difficult. So we spent, many years and 4 patents in actually developing this technology. So it makes it very easy for customers.
Which kind of talks about the history of this. I mean, one question came in, what if I don't have an SD-WAN? Can I use this product to baseline flows in my network? And then the person asking the question says, I got over 3,000 Linux servers, it's an MPLS network, and I'd like to build a whitelist for this closed network, which I don't know what that last question exactly means as far as a whitelist for the network, but I think I get the idea that it's a private network, and yes, you can use LiveAction to monitor that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this router could be any router that's exporting flow. We're multi-vendor in terms of that. So we can show you this exact view with your devices, and it doesn't have to be running SD-WAN at all. And you can drill into this particular device, and I know we had that question about real-time views. So this is actually updating every 10 seconds, and it shows you all the different flows that are going across the tunnel and also the different interfaces as well. I'm going to pause this real quick here. But you can see that we're picking up things like Citrix and Outlook, so deep packet inspection information.
Okay, and so with those flows that you're seeing and modeling here go back to endpoints. So if I have the 3,000 servers, I can be learning what flows are coming out of what servers then.
Yeah, so if you have a ton of servers, you're going to see this kind of information. So yeah, we can model that as well. But the interesting thing about this is every time we've installed this tool within platform on a particular customer site, they realize something wrong. For example, they had NTP coming wrong off of the wrong trunk, going to like the wrong NTP server. And they had this for years, and they never realized it until they saw this view and saw NTP was coming off of the wrong interface. So it's just kind of interesting. And when it gets to like the larger deployments, people are spend hours and hours in this topology view because they never actually seen how their traffic was actually routed, and they realized that this traffic was getting hairpin, and they never knew that. So it's actually pretty fun to explore this interface. And one of the other go ahead.
Are you able to handle temporary links or radio style links is what I mean to say, point-to-point connections over radio or cellular connections?
We've done that in the past, so we can do that to a certain extent, but I think we do more the traditional campus access distribution WAN type more. But yeah, we've actually done, our background is actually in military research where they do a lot of wireless and bringing up those types of services. So we've actually used that, and you can see the wireless headsets actually coming into like one of the interfaces as well. So that's not the typical use case, but you should try it out with your own deployment. And just real quick, I mentioned that we store everything in raw format, and so what we can do is things like replay. So we can replay all that's happened within this particular device across the whole system, so that if somebody complained about an issue like yesterday, we could go back in time and just say play it. I'm playing it in 30-second intervals. I could do it in 1 hour and just show you that whole entire day, within a minute or so. and I could do it from like an application perspective. So you can slice and dice this data over time, over different dimensions. So it actually makes it pretty interesting as well.
How much bandwidth or maybe flow records, is there some limit to how much data you can ingest here? Someone's asking about the performance and AVC limitations of the platform.
Oh, we're pretty scalable. So we've actually tested our per node to absorb 1,000,000 flows per second. I think more the issue is making sure you have this the storage capability to actually store that. But yeah, scalability is really not an issue for us in terms of like the flow. So we have very large customers, well-known retail, financial, all the different verticals that have used this globally. So. Okay, so that's a little bit on, day zero type monitoring, right? Understanding a WAN. So this is a typical WAN. So let's take a look at, SD-WAN. So this is an SD-WAN deployment, a very simple one, where you have Tokyo that has a master controller and 2 border routers going to Sydney, for example. So this is interesting where we're looking at the flows from a perspective of, DSCP markings of the different applications. So this is interesting where, if you have EF marked traffic, which is in red, you were supposed to prefer over MPLS. You should typically see all of it on the MPLS side, and you can go back in time to see, verify if it's actually working at, certain points in time. But it's a good assurance of like understanding, is the policy actually working? Is the flows going across the way I think? And it's pretty detailed in terms of being able to show all the way down to the tunnels and also the physical interfaces, local interface as well. So it's very granular in terms of understanding, and it can correlate it with information about, inbound, outbound bandwidth as well. So using this, you can understand, where things are traversing to and understand, what's happening. You can convert this also to, correlate it with performance. So these are the specific flows that have performance issues, for example, and then you can, understand which applications and things are having issues, for example.
So a couple of questions here. One, the interface that you're using, is this actually a web interface, or is this a special tool, like a client, like a Windows-based client, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's an application written primarily in Java, very easy to install. We also have a topology view that I showed briefly on the website as well. So you'll see parts of it on the website. You'll see the Sankey and some of the path side more on the website. And this is a much more in-depth interactive app. But over time, most of this functionality will be in the website. So.
Now, we've been talking mostly about IP version 4. Is there also V6 support?
Yeah, we're pretty agnostic. So V4, V6, just make sure the routers are exporting those flow records. So. And it's interesting, it gets pretty complex in terms of the flow export, because there's just so many different templates, and the end customers can actually adjust those templates any way they want. So we can absorb any of those. And I think you saw a little bit of that when you look at it from this perspective. You can look at all the different flow types, and you'll see all the different column ranges as well. So there's a lot of data that can get exported pretty efficient through IPFix. But it's really making sense of that. That's the hard part.
How did you identify all the different applications that you guys are identifying? Is that your own algorithm, or are you licensing somebody's library to figure out what's what?
Well, different vendors typically have, some type of deep packet inspection. Cisco has MBAR2, and also Viptela has their own. So we grab that information and then we display that. But we allow our customers to do, custom applications, for example. So we know customers have, specific, server IP addresses or port numbers that are very important to them. So they can, use that to override any defaults.
Now, you mentioned Java a second ago, and I felt a disturbance in the force. Are there plans to migrate to something like HTML5?
Oh yeah, so everything I've shown you earlier is actually HTML5, and some of the topology views that I showed you as well is HTML5. So let me just bring that back up here. So yeah, this is all Angular, HTML5 using Node.js on the back end, for example. So all modern technologies. So you'll see, parts of the topology. We'll be able to flip that into like a logical view. We have path-based analysis views here as well, and I've shown you all the Sankey data sets as well. So I think the more interesting, visualizations will show up on the web, and then we're moving over the topology views as well on the back end.
So in the demo that we're working through here, is there a reports area that we're going to get to?
Oh yeah. So
someone asked about that and maybe being able to do executive reports. So I don't want to disrupt your flow here as you're working through this, but that's if that's something we're going to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do reports, and one of the things that we found is the real power of this topology is like putting this maps to the way the operator thinks. So it's very easy for them to like debug and understand their network. And if they want to run a report on a specific interface, it's really just right-click, give me an application report, and we can just grab that for you. So from here, we have way too many dimensions.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So I mean, do what you will with this data, but we can give you everything you want. We can grab every single telemetry point, and then you can build custom reports from this as well.
Okay, so if I build a custom report that's suitable for one of my executives, could I have it like scheduled to just run weekly and then send an email out?
Yeah, so from a web interface, you can just create custom reports, and we'll provide a nice URL that you can send to your manager, for example, and then he can interactively play with that report, or you can do a PDF, for example. Because the interesting thing is, at the end of the day, with SD-WAN and these technologies, the network operators have to be able to explain to their manager, this is the problem. This is how we're going to fix it. This is how we're going to optimize in the future. So having a platform that visualizes so that you can understand what's going on, because you're going to have to explain it to somebody at some point. So very important.
Well, John, we're coming up on about 6 minutes left before we hit the top of the hour. What else are you going to show off here?
So I have about 20 more minutes of demo. So
of course.
So let me cut parts of it short. I'm going to go real super fast. I'm going to go into super fast mode. So a couple interesting things is, like I mentioned, leveraging the network infrastructure to help you answer questions is actually important. So I'm showing you WAN, I'm showing you flow, and the flow is telling me performance. The red, dark red, that is showing me packet loss. I double click on that, on what's going on. I can see it's voice traffic, a lot of loss, what's really going on, double click. I can gather the data hop by hop. So hitting the Seattle router, hitting the data center router, show me in the topology view. I got all the metrics to back it up. I can run any of the reports. I can see it from this visual. It's actually voice over IP traffic. Hitting my Seattle site, and I know the customer, one of the person asked about the QoS side. So flip over for the QoS side, we have indication that there's drops happening. Double click. Give you NBAR2 information for deep packet inspection, what's going on. Look at it from the QoS perspective, voice traffic dropping, right click, adjust output QoS. We've been doing this for many, many years. We can read the QoS policy, adjust the policy to increase the bandwidth. We're smart in that we model the actual QoS policy. So if you preview the CLI, it's not a template based. We'll fix that particular issue, the bandwidth, with the right no commands and put it right back in if you need it. So,
okay, I know you're going super fast, but that's pretty huge for everyone that thought this was just analytics and reporting. Well, no, actually, you can jump from here and then make a configuration change and push it back out to the device.
Yeah. So one last thing I'll do is the Viptela piece. So this is actually Viptela because I know people have asked. So these are V edges. So New York, Seattle, Los Angeles, going over to transport, MPLS, and internet. And I know they were asking, can you see into the vBOM, vSmart, vManage? Yeah, we actually can. We can show you actually how it's all connected. So very good detail. And we have REST API integration to vManage to grab data from them. And then the flow. So here you can see the application traffic all the way from your edge devices going into your vEdge, going across the MPLS, nothing going across the internet, which is kind of unusual. So this is good for like, hey, there's something wrong. Very visual, tells you there's something wrong here.
And again, the application identification that we might see on this screen, you're actually pulling from the Viptela environment and what it identifies as a given app.
Yeah, so we're working on those integrations. So I think in the next release, we'll have that full integration there. But here we're using some of the basic flow information. But yeah, we're building in that REST API call there. So yeah, like I mentioned, like every controller has, different schemas. So it's not like we do one and we solve for n cases. So we have to spend a little bit of time there. Yeah, so this is good. I missed one point on the other capability. So what I wanted to show you was like the metrics from SD-WAN. So, whether it's IWAN or Viptela, these are the type of metrics that you can get. So alerts related to particular sites. So, understanding site-to-site alerts is important, and we can classify by loss, delay, jitter, unreachability. I know I've got about 2 minutes left, Ethan, so super fast mode.
Yep.
Service provider, this is the most interesting metric. Service provider, who's having the worst performance, MPLS. You can call up your service provider saying what's going on. Now you have evidence to call them up about. And we can break it up by, bandwidth by application, by bandwidth by sites. But this is really important or really interesting is real-time information about loss sites, loss, delay, and jitter by site, by application, by service provider. So when you're debugging something, this really kind of shows you is it mapping to your policy or intent. And that is it. That is my demo.
So a question that's come up, it would be a good one to close on perhaps, a pricing and licensing model.
Yeah, so licensing model is per device. We don't care what type of device. So if you buy a 25 device license, that's built in. So you could put like a Nexus 9K and with an ISR, 3800, for example. It's the same price. So pretty easy. In terms of pricing, we have like a subscription and a perpetual. So I mean, for that, I think, just set up a call or, just contact our salespeople, and then they'll help you through this. So, we can. I'm sure we can accommodate, the various customers here. So.
Sure. Now you mentioned the how people can download that. You want to refresh their memory?
Yeah, sure. So just a real fast recap. So faster troubleshooting, faster deployment, increased visibility, and start your free trial. LiveAction.com/download.
As an alternative to downloading it and running it themselves, do you have like an online lab that maybe people could go to?
Yeah, we do have labs, and if you're a Cisco partners, we can provide you some more information on running it in the cloud as well. So there's some other options there, but the virtual appliance is actually pretty easy to spin up. So.
Now, folks, there's several more questions that came in with some details we just didn't have time to get to today, but the folks at LiveAction are monitoring those questions and should be able to get back to you, circle back up, and make sure any questions you have remaining about the product are answered. Parting thoughts, John?
No, I mean, I think it's really critical, especially as you deploy new technologies, whether it's SD-WAN or others, that you get the visibility, because the human aspect of it is actually very important. So the operators augmented with a good analytics platform can take you a long ways to where you need to get to.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of the webinar today. This is with John Smith, CTO at LiveAction, and I'm Ethan Banks, a co-host of the Packet Pushers podcast, which you can find out more about at packetpushers.net, where we talk nerdy by and for engineers. Thanks, everyone.